thanks very much for the chance to present in this August session. So yes, what I'm going to talk about is shown on the left. There is 4 topics. So the first is uh, topography data, just in general, quick primer, and then I'll give 2 rifting related examples. One from Bora Peak, and I'll talk about pre-rupture mapping. And then the second one, I'll talk about the El Mayor Cucupa earthquake topographic differencing. And then I'll end by talking about the open topography data infrastructure. So for example, here in this view, the main picture is one of the Dabahu volcano area in Afar, so one of the fault zones that Reha talked about. And you can see the power of the topography is the ability to depict the landforms at appropriate scale where we can study the phenomena that form this topography. So you see in the left view portion of this view, we can see some of the really beautiful volcanic texture from these lava flows, which are then faulted by the Afar related rift structures. And it's important also, we have to remember that topography gives us that third dimension, the elevation. So it's not just the pretty pictures. And that's what I'm showing by this topographic profile across a couple of those faults. Of course, we can also go very large scale with topography. And here's a view of combined topography and bathymetry across the entire Atlantic, since we're talking also about rifted margins. And you can see the power of this depiction where we see the 2 rifted margins with their slope breaks and lowest elevations or deepest bathymetry in that older part of the seafloor. And then as we go to the center, the mid-ocean ridge, the elevation goes up with the younger topography or bathymetry, and also gives us that potential energy for ridge push. So in terms of technology, we're producing topographic data with several methods, and I acknowledge also that gravity and radar methods will produce topography, but I'm going to talk about 4D imaging with topography and lasers. And we can use space-based platforms like I show on the left, which are really, I think, the future of a lot of our work, be broad-scale space-based imaging, but mostly that's done with cameras, and we do stereo mapping. Well-known Pleiad system from Airbus and France, CNES. But mostly what I'll talk about and where we see the big workhorses for studying active faults is airborne laser scanning and airborne and terrestrial LiDAR. So this would be the case where we have a laser scanner shooting maybe 100,000 pulses per second. And then we have the platform, we know where it is, like the aircraft position by GPS, and its orientation by inertial navigation. And so we can do it also on the ground on a tripod. But the thing that many of us are becoming quite familiar with is shown on the right, where we use the method called structure from motion, which is a kind of photogrammetry. The motion of the camera provides depth information, and we reconstruct the scene structure, which refers to both the camera positions and orientations, and the topography, which is what we care about. And what is the very common platform is are these small UAS, like I showed there. So if we move then to open topography and some of the experience that we've had in the Western US, one of the early motivators was this really ambitious project called the B4 project. I'm looking at the upper right of this screen here. And so B4 is as in prior to is what I mean. And so the idea from Mike Beavis, Ken Hudnett, and others that they collaborated with the National Center for Airborne Laser Mapping was to laser scan the southern San Andreas Fault using airborne laser scanning. And what they did was fly 600 kilometers of the fault zone and a few kilometer width. So that turned into 1,900 square kilometers at about 3 points per square meter. So there's like 600 billion points in this data set. And the problem was early on, we were just shipping this hard drive around and saying, good luck finding the data that you want. And so what we did in our open topography project was work to make topographic data openly available for the study of active fault zones, as well as many other things. And in the process of doing this and this experience, we found that I've kind of classified the types of research in four areas: mapping tectonic landforms, delineating fault zones, reconstructing deformed landscapes, examining interacting and surface and tectonic processes. So this would be what Reha was talking about in the last presentation, and calculating topographic change. So basically directly comparing two different topographic surveys. So I'm going to talk about the two bold case examples here. So first is, well, before I do that, just as another reminder of the challenge for topography and active faults, is that on is that we need large length scales. That outer length can be 10 to the fifth meters, so 100 kilometers, but the inner length scale might be less than a meter. So if we take the typical earthquake scaling that I show here, if you look at the left, you could say a magnitude 7 earthquake might be 100 kilometers long, but that same magnitude 7 earthquake is going to have displacements, average displacements of a meter. So we need to have a very small ruler so that we can measure the phenomena associated with this earthquake or its effects over the large scale. So this is our challenge that has to be met with the topography data collection and also data distribution. So the first example then is from the Bora Peak earthquake. It was in 1983. It was about magnitude 6.9. And I'm showing some work from Simone Bello, who's at the University of Chieti Pescara in southeastern Italy. And we worked together to map along this fault zone. And he used those data to reconstruct the rupture. But I'm also going to now talk about, and so you can see here this beautiful landscape, and you see the 1983 free face, but also we can see that this earthquake occurred where there had been another one about 6,000 years ago, right along the same zone. So there's previous fault scarps as well in that same location. So one of the projects that we've been working on with Chelsea Scott here at my university is evaluating how well active fault mapping predicts earthquake surface rupture locations. And so we have several papers. Also, one of our students, Rachel Adam, published one. So this work has been supported by Pacific Gas and Electric because it has significant surface rupture hazard implications. And so one of the things that we have been able to do is shown here, and that is if you look at on the left, this is mapping that was done by experts as well as students on data that was collected prior to the 1983 earthquake. So it was reconstructed topography from 1960s aerial photographs. And so mapping, mapping was done. You see the colors indicate primary versus secondary faults and their certainty. And then on the right, the coseismic ruptures are what actually happened in the earthquake. And so we can test how well does fault mapping anticipate the rupture. And sometimes we see that it can be okay, but sometimes we miss geomorphology that indicates the faults, but also sometimes the earthquakes just rupture where there was no indicators to expect them. So in this work, what our team was able to show in this case, that particular mapping was Bora Peak 3. So 43% of the ruptures were predicted, 68% of the principal ones, 24% of the distributed ones. And so this is, I think, is sobering when we think about active fault maps, that it's quite challenging to really anticipate where ground rupture will occur, and we can predict 10 to 50%. You can teach mapping and people will get better at it, but also we know that experience does improve mapping. So experienced mappers were generally able to do the best, but experienced mappers still missed ruptures. So then transitioning to my next topic, which is about topographic differencing. Here we're moving to Southern California and Northern Mexico in the Baja California transtensional rift system as it transitions to the Southern San Andreas Fault. And in 2010, there was the earthquake that was the El Mayor Cucupa earthquake. It was a magnitude 7.1 event, and you can see on the right some of the post-earthquake imaging that's been illuminated from the northeast, and we can see the fault traces quite clearly. So this project was led by Mike Oskin, and also we collaborated with our Mexican colleagues and Alejandro Hinojosa and John Fletcher, and we collected data. And well, here's what the fault scarps look like. Very beautiful example of surface rupture. And here you can see Eulalia Massana and John Fletcher, and their feet would match up. So this was oblique slip, both right lateral and vertical. And so what we did was we were able to take the pre-event data. There was a LiDAR collection made by the Mexican Cartographic Agency, INEGI, and then we were able to gather funding to collect post-event imaging. And so we subtracted those two. So this is a vertical difference map. You can see the colors. The blue is minus 2.5. Blue, red would be plus 1.5. So you can see the vertical manifestation of this rupture. And you see in XX prime profile, which is then shown in the lower center, that not only are we able to see the displacement discontinuities of the main fault rupture, but what was really interesting was the warping of the fault blocks between the main faults. And that was something unexpected. You can also see it on the left where the main fault discontinuities are clear, but also this warping of the blocks between we could capture with this fine scale topographic differencing. So now transition.
That's 10 minutes. So that's
Okay. Yeah, I'm now transitioning to the last part of the presentation, which is just talking about topographic data and the Open Topography project. It's mostly emphasizing high resolution data in the lower 48 of North America, but we continue to make more and more data available. So this diagram shows in green is the U.S. Geological Survey called 3D Elevation Program. Almost 95% of the lower 48 is covered at high resolution, like multiple points per square meter LiDAR data. You can see red are data for which Open Topography is the primary access point. Blue is NOAA data, so coastal data. And purple are data that users have uploaded and published themselves using our community data space. You can see in the lower center, we also have a big partnership with Land Information New Zealand. So almost all of New Zealand is covered with high resolution point clouds. So this is almost 85 trillion points at a total data cost of $1.5 billion probably. So that's one example. The second one is here. So this would be global data. So it's easy to access 10 to 30 meter per pixel data for the whole world from a number of different sources. We recently made the high resolution digital elevation model of Canada available. And then here you can see, just since we're talking about AFAR, here is on the left, the orange color implies that there's lots of global data available, but the blue polygons show data that have been uploaded by different users. So I showed the Dabho example at the very beginning, and now I'm just showing at the lower right data that were collected and then published in OpenTopo for Fentale volcano. So the lower view is an oblique perspective of the point cloud of Fentale, which, as we know, has been recently demonstrating some unrest. So you might say, okay, that's great, but what about how do I get access to the data? So if you're from a US institution, it's quite easy. Everything is free with a .edu email address. But if you don't have that and you want to access, international academics can request data here. We've had the challenge that we are funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, and even though data are open, they're not free. And so, but we are happy to work with anyone who wants to gain access. We also have this subscription system, the OT Plus. So with that, I'll end my presentation and welcome questions and collaborations. You can see on the left just another beautiful view of active normal fault. This is the Teton fault zone as it cuts more rains. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ramon. So I open the floor to questions.
Yeah, questions.
Looking for hands. I've got a question in the meantime. I guess you mentioned in the LiDAR difference or the topographic differencing and constraining vertical motions. Is it possible to constrain horizontal motions?
Yes, it's more challenging. There are two approaches. One is a kind of an image differencing where we can use cross correlation to match the pixels, and that's commonly done for radar and other kind of electro-optical imaging. But you can do the same thing with topographic images. But also, my colleague Chelsea Scott is, along with Ed Nissen, have pioneered the use of windowed ICP, which means iterative closest point. So we're matching windows of the point clouds in fully 3D. And so then we get the rigid body transformation, both displacements and rotations of these windows along the different data sets. And I should say, Chelsea has a beautiful paper about doing this along the central San Andreas fault, and also Chelsea and Ed published some nice papers about doing this on some Japanese earthquakes, including Kumamoto.
Thanks. So any questions? So I don't see any. I can ask another one. I guess, is there any scope to do like joint inversion of LiDAR differencing and INSAR? Because I suppose they both have some disadvantages and advantages that would be, combined well.
Yeah, actually, Chelsea wrote a really nice GRL paper doing that for Kumamoto, and she actually inverted for 3 data sets. So she had the LiDAR for the near field, then intermediate field image differencing, and then wide field INSAR. And she was able to also show the resolving power. So the LiDAR gives really good resolving power because it's close to the fault for the shallow part of the deformation zone. And as the aperture increases, and which means the different methods are used, the resolving power transitions to the optical differencing and then to INSAR. So I thought that was really, really interesting and very powerful because a lot of the, like INSAR kind of decorrelates along fault zone. So if you want to characterize or invert for slip in the shallow part of the fault zone, you need something like topographic differencing.